Does Anne Marie need to turn on the camera and Robbie?
We are live. We are live. Yeah.
All right, welcome to the January 31st, 2023 meeting of the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees. This meeting is being held in person with some committee members participating remotely. At this time, I will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person when your name is called. Karina Edmonds. Matthew Lenz is present. Richard Humphrey. Michael McNally.
Present via WebEx.
Roby Luna.
Present via WebEx.
Hannah Becker. David Caprio. I think you're on mute, David, but we see you.
Sorry, present via WebEx.
Thank you. Mark Palange.
Present via WebEx.
I believe we have 3 out of 5 voting members present. We should have a quorum.
Yes, we do. And I'd like to just briefly recognize members of senior leadership and others who are here present in the building, in the meeting room, I should say. We have Abby Ryder, Carol Larson, Lindsay Notting, Patty Correa, Ted Mayette, Dan Moose, myself, Lynn Owens, and James Zahn. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. A quorum is present. We're going to call the meeting to order. I first just want to take a quick second just to thank Abby Ryder and congratulate her on the recent announcement. I'm sure we'll spend plenty of time singing your praises, but while I have you here, thank you very much for all the work you've done for the university. You are going to be missed.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's been a real pleasure for me. And, you know, it's the pleasure of working with the really remarkable people at the university and supporting the university that's really made it all worthwhile. So thank you.
Big shoes to fill. All right, reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and the note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion, or second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on, as remote members and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional homeland of the Narragansett Nation and Niantic people. The first order of business is approval of the minutes. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee approve the minutes of the September 16th, 2022 joint meeting of the Finance and Facilities and Institutional Risk and Compliance Committees?
Matt, this is Mike. I'll move approval.
Great, thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
Robbie Luna, second.
Thank you, Robbie. Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Please say yes. Yes, aye.
Yes.
No?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Yeses have it. The motion to approve the minutes of September 16th meeting is approved. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the October 18th joint meeting. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee approve the minutes of the October 18th, 2022 joint meeting of the Finance and Facilities and Institutional Risk and Compliance Committees?
Robbie Luna, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Matt, this is Mike. I'll second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'm asking for a voice vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Any noes? Any abstentions? The motion to approve the minutes of the October 18th meeting is approved. Next item on the agenda is item 2, discussion items. We're going to open with, I believe, title regulations, Carol Larson.
Karen?
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Moving it right up next to me. Okay. Okay. As you know, I'm the Assistant Vice President for Enterprise Risk Management, but I also serve as the Title IX Coordinator for the university And I'm here today to go over the proposed changes to the current Title IX regulations that we operate under. If I could have the slides. Oh, it's a PDF, not a PowerPoint. So we can't advance the slides.
Yes, you
Well,
can
other
advance
than
them.
advancing the pages.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the next page?
yeah, that's a click
I think
view,
that works.
yeah, click view, and go back one page. Yeah.
Yep. And then you could just advance it like a slide.
Page up or page down.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, great. Can we go back to the first
Go back
slide?
one. There you go.
Okay, now go forward one. So you might recall that the Department of Education issued regulations actually in May of 2020 that dramatically changed the landscape of Title IX compliance, providing some very strict investigation and hearing procedures for complaints under Title IX. The current administration last June dropped new proposed Title IX regulations that once again significantly change the landscape if they are put into effect in their current proposed form. So after the June issuance of the proposed regulations, there was a period for public comment. And after that period, the Department of Education has been taking into consideration those comments and has recently announced that they plan to issue the final version in May, with intention that they would be effective in August 2023, right before the beginning of the next academic year. That time frame is significant because it gives higher education as well as K through 12 very little time to put into place all of the programming and processes and policies that would be needed to be compliant on the effective date. So I'm going to go through in this presentation some of the major changes between the current regulations and these new proposed regulations. It's possible the final regulations will be slightly different, but not appreciably so based on the comments. So first of all, the current regulations actually address only sexual harassment. The new regulations purport to broaden the definition of covered actions. And so they've now included a definition of sex discrimination to include sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things in a bit. They also have a new definition of sex-based harassment, which is sexual harassment based on sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, again, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and other sex-based conduct, which is a catch-all that is going to be very difficult to assess how that's going to impact us. And then they have included a definition of hostile environment. And again, they are pulling this from Title VII, which is the law that governs employment discrimination, and sex discrimination in employment is one of those things covered by Title VII. So they're trying to mirror that definition with the hostile environment. And that's just unwelcome sex-based conduct that is sufficiently severe or pervasive. And then you base it on the totality of the circumstances, you evaluate it subjectively and objectively. And then if you come to the conclusion that it has denied or limited a person's ability to participate in or benefit from our education program or activity, then you will have a hostile environment. So the difference here between the current regulations and these regulations is this introduction of things that go beyond what we currently define as sexual misconduct, which is misconduct, harassment, discrimination, but for purposes of, there's a sexual component for sexual gratification or things like that. This takes in, like Title VII, all of the just general, anything that's based on a person's sex. But they also retain the existing definitions of quid pro quo harassment and the criminal sex crimes, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. So the last two are holdovers, but the first three are significant changes. And the reason they're significant is that it will really increase the scope of what falls within Title IX jurisdiction from a definitional standpoint. And we will have much greater obligations to address a much broader type of behavior within our campus community. Next slide, please. And that could obviously increase, that increase in scope increases our caseload potentially. Next.
Lynn, next slide.
Just page down.
Yeah, page down, we'll do it. No, your cursor's moving. There you go.
There you go. Another expansion of jurisdiction that differs from the existing regulations. The existing regulations actually limited jurisdiction back in 2020 to conduct that occurred in our education program or activity, but would not include conduct outside the United States or basically outside of our campus jurisdiction, unless we owned or controlled a building or a student organization that's officially recognized, owns or controls an off-campus thing. In our situation here at the university, all of that is on campus. So for the past several years, our jurisdiction has pretty much been limited to things that occurred on campus, and off-campus conduct was addressed through our student conduct system. Now, they've returned to the prior pre-2020 situation where even conduct that occurs off campus, if the conduct is in a situation where the person would be under our disciplinary authority on a student conduct side, that is now Title IX. So again, a lot of the behavior that is now being handled by student conduct would now become Title IX jurisdiction. And I apologize for that third bullet. I don't know what happened there. But what that refers to is if there is an impact on a person's ability to participate in our education programs or activities here in the United States based on conduct outside the United States, that also is within our jurisdiction. So that implicates our study abroad programs. And it also, under the current regulations, the complainant has to be can only file a complaint if they're currently participating in our education program or activity. The complainants regain the ability to file even after they leave the university. And the intent of that is a lot of times pre-2020, complainants were so impacted by what was happening to them that they would leave the university and didn't feel comfortable trying to pursue the grievance process while they were still here because of their trepidation and fear and trauma. And with the change in 2020, that actually depressed reporting because complainants had to do it while they were still here. And that had a chilling effect, frankly, on the reporting. So now it's back to if even after they leave the university, they can still file a complaint, and the university will be obligated to address it. So next.
No, that's.
Oh, we have gone. Okay. It also broadly increases the scope of responsibility of the Title IX coordinator and the Title IX program. In other words, what we've been currently doing is basically reacting to situations. We do a lot of training. I have a deputy Title IX coordinator who does nothing but training. But most of our work has been just reacting to complaints, to reports, and to providing services and going through the grievance process. Now we have an affirmative, proactive obligation to operate our programs and activities free from prohibited sex discrimination at all times. So even if no one files a complaint, if we learn of it, we have to do something to remedy it, to address it, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the Title IX coordinator would now be obligated to monitor for barriers to reporting and then take steps to reasonably calculated to address barriers that are identified. Examples of that are, doing surveys, doing publications, and things like that, that obviously are another broadening of what we would need to do to maintain compliance.
Sarah, I just had a question on, does that scope, is that basically pre-2022, or is that even larger than the scope before pre-2022?
Great question, Matt. This scope of responsibility is even broader than pre-2022 under the Dear Colleague letters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It also changes reporting. The 2020 regulations changed the reporting structure so that the standard was actual knowledge of the university was what triggered the obligation to respond. And then we would be judged by a standard of deliberate indifference if we did not respond, and that would lead to liability. So what the current standard is, I'm sorry, next slide on reporting. So what we had done to comply with that is we had identified the officials with authority that if they knew about it, we had actual knowledge. If the vice president, AVP of HR knew about it, we had actual knowledge, or if I knew about it, we had actual knowledge. But if any other employee knew about it, that didn't automatically create actual knowledge on the part of the university. They had to bring it forward, and they could only bring it forward with the permission of the person, the potential complainant, because it's always the complainant's decision as to whether to go forward and file a complaint. Now we are more back to the mandatory reporting potentially. So it's any employee who has authority to take any corrective action, or with incidents involving students has responsibility for administrative leadership, teaching, or advising. They are now obligated to notify the Title IX coordinator. All other employees are obligated to either notify the Title IX coordinator or provide the individual with the contact information of the Title IX coordinator and information about reporting. Obviously, the only exception to that is confidential employees are not obligated.
Such as psychiatrists.
Right, so there's three types of, they define confidential employees, and there's three categories of that. And so we basically are going to have to classify our employees according to these categories. People with authority, everybody else, and confidential employees. So those with a privilege, like psychologists, social workers, things with a legal privilege. There's also employees that we could designate as confidential, even if there's no pre-existing legal privilege. And then the third category is people involved in an IRB study on sex discrimination for purposes of what they might learn in a study, like a research study. They are confidential. So the way we're going to have to deal with this is through training. And so now training is required. Now, everybody here knows that we've had required employee training on preventing sexual violence and, to comply with Title IX. But that was sort of self-imposed. We had only legal training requirement was for people actually involved in the Title IX grievance process, like the Title IX coordinator, deputy Title IX coordinators, facilitators, hearing officers, decision makers, people like that. Now it is a federal requirement, or will be a federal requirement, that all employees receive this training. So that ups the stakes. given our, inability to get 100% compliance on our self-imposed training, this is now legally required. So that's going to be a big lift to do this training. We also have to ensure that everybody has information about who's confidential and all that. We have to tell people who has the duty to notify and who doesn't. And then, of course, we have to honor complainant's request not to proceed whenever possible. But the Title IX coordinator still retains the ability to file a complaint on the behalf of someone who does not want to proceed if there's deemed a threat. Next slide. Well, the current regulations require supportive measures, and that continues. So we have to offer supportive measures equally to complainants or respondents as necessary to restore or preserve that person's access to our education program or activity. Because again, the whole point of Title IX is that this conduct that is sexual harassment, sex discrimination, limits or denies the ability of an individual to fully participate in our education programs or activities. So that's why we want to immediately get going on supportive measures to try to restore or preserve that equal access. So we do counseling, we can extend deadlines, we do no contact orders, we can assist in changing classes, workplaces, or housing. So all of that continues. It's just really, pounded on, for lack of a better word, in these new regulations. Next.
The time.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, very briefly on the grievance procedure, we have as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a very strict grievance procedure that outlines timeframes and how to investigate and what the hearing looks like and everything in writing and providing evidence and all that. The new grievance procedure is much looser, much more flexible, gives us a lot of flexibility to define it the way we want. And that's under the general requirements that apply across the board. But there are additional requirements for higher education where it involves a sexual hostile environment between two students. And so that looks a lot more like what we currently have. It doesn't require a live hearing, but live hearings are allowed. It requires written notifications. It requires a written decision. In all other instances, we don't even have to do a written investigation report anymore. We don't have to do a written decision. All of that can be done in summary or through notifications. So it's a lot looser, a lot less onerous, unless it's student on student. And then we have these more onerous, higher threshold grievance processes. Next. Also, under the current regulations, we are allowed to offer informal resolution, but under the current regulations, that requires a formal complaint to be filed. When they've done away, now that they've done away with the formal complaint process, complaints can come in verbally in writing, and they don't have to be formal. We can now offer informal resolution without a formal complaint. We can offer it as an either or. You can do a complaint and you can go down the grievance process, or you can do an informal resolution. It's voluntary, it's like a mediation. And the only instance where it's not permitted is when it involves an employee and against a student against an employee. So that you cannot do informal resolution due to the power imbalance there. So what we anticipate with these changes is a lot more reports. A lot of the flexibility is going to remove the chilling effect that we're currently seeing from students who really don't want to go through that very rigid, very legalistic, very, potentially re-traumatizing process. For instance, just this year, I've got 12 cases that I've been doing since the beginning of the academic year that actually came to Title IX. But we know through our other service providers, we have 35 known incidents since the beginning of the academic year. It's, so we potentially see that those 35 under the new regulations are more likely to actually get reported to Title IX for resolution. And so we do anticipate a significant increase in caseload. Just a couple of other comments before I talk about pregnancy is, well, I'll just go on. Let's just, I know Abby's like, shut up. So let's move on to pregnancy. The other thing that the new regulations do, and this is going to be this is also going to be a big lift, is it strengthens the protections for students and employees who are pregnant or have pregnancy-related conditions. We have to provide reasonable modifications for students, in helping them complete their coursework or making up time. We need reasonable break time for lactation and a lactation space for both students and employees. We cannot obviously treat parents differently on the basis of whether they've got children or not. And if an employee learns that a student is pregnant, they have to immediately refer that student to the Title IX coordinator for services. So right now, pregnancy or related conditions or historically have been provided by the Women's Center. All of that will now become a Title IX responsibility to assist pregnant students and potentially assist pregnant employees in getting accommodations and things like that. So we're going to have to create an entire program around this, and so that's going to be a pretty big lift. Next. Okay, so this I just wanted to point out. I mean, we talked about at the beginning, the new definitions include sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics. So this is, just to make it clear that that is part of what is considered sex discrimination. And the thing that we need to be careful of here with these new broadened definitions is that obviously some of the conduct that could be perceived as violating Title IX as being sex discrimination on the basis of, for instance, gender identity, could violate the First Amendment. So we're going to have a balancing act to do here with this. For instance, a lot of the commentators are talking about mispronouncing students or dead naming students, as the phrase is, could be sex discrimination under Title IX, but it could also, if we do something about that, it could run afoul of someone's First Amendment rights of free speech. So that's something that has to be really thought through, and we have to figure out the balance there. And last, this is in Title IX specifically, but last March, the president signed the reauthorization of VAWA. And what it does is requires the Secretary of Education to create an online service tool with respect to campus safety, and beginning no later than 1 year after that tool is made available, and it hasn't been made available yet, but will be required to administer it on a biennial basis. But while they're providing the tool, we do need, the university does have to have someone who administers the tool and and ensures this last bullet to the maximum extent practicable that an adequate, random, and representative sample size of students complete it. So that's, another sort of program that we need to put into place to make sure that we are, one, meeting all the timelines to administer the tool, that we are doing it biannually, and that we are getting the sample that the law requires. So that's just, the major changes. The devil's in the details. It's hundreds of pages of, of Federal Register commentary, and so there's a lot more. But this is what I wanted to alert people to let you know that we've got a big challenge ahead of us with respect to Title IX compliance.
Right, there's a lot of work.
A lot of work.
Involved, and the volume of issues that Title IX office will be dealing with is going to increase significantly. Yeah.
Kara, this is Mike. Do you have the team to do that?
No.
I was going to ask the same question, Mike. I definitely think this is something that's worthy of broader board discussion on just our overall strategy here to make sure that we comply, and not just comply, but do it the right way with these new regulations. It's definitely something I would encourage President, and I know you will, take this very seriously, and that we should just talk about this together as a group.
Hard when the governor cuts your budget.
It-
It can be, yeah, there's some difficulties there. Karina, I know that you are on. I
Yeah.
didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being late. I do have a question. You mentioned that there's 12 cases that are going through the formal process, but you know of at least 35. How are those other ones being processed or reported, or through what office?
We have a service on campus called the Violence Prevention Advocacy Services, and it's staffed by a staff member from Health Services. And she is a resource for people who have been subjected to sexual violence. And she offers support services, advocacy, gets them counseling and things like that, tries to steer them toward the reporting, but very few. They just want the support, they just want the help, but they do not want to go through that, the existing reporting and grievance process that makes it, very hard, very legalistic and very rigid, and it's very intimidating.
The current hearing process really resembles a trial very closely. So it's,
Right, there's a hearing officer who has to, as each question is asked, has to rule on the relevance of the question, and there have to be advisors who cross-examine, and so, yeah, it can be very trial-like. Although lawyers are not required to be advisors, you can have your advisor be anyone, but many people are hiring lawyers.
Sure, and then just lastly, that person then will that person become a confidential employee, or they will be obligated to then report it and file with
No,
this new?
Yeah, our current VPAS employee is currently a confidential employee and will remain a confidential employee. They are licensed.
Okay, thank you.
I guess my last question, for me anyways, is there any type of safe harbors that are going to be made available to comply with the new sections, or is there any plan for that from the department?
Not that I'm aware of, other than the time between the final regulations being proposed and the actual effective dates. That's the time you are given to bring your programs into compliance.
and that was also true the last time they changed the regulations.
It was.
Different administration, but the same very, very short implementation time. I'm not sure why they're doing this, but they are.
They are. So but we're going to start early in anticipation that a lot of this isn't going to change, and we're already working on our policy and procedures to redraft them to mirror what's required in the new regulations. And then we might only be in a situation of having to tweak.
All right, is there any other questions? Right, moving on. I think we're sticking with you for the review of the insurance market.
We are.
All right.
And I wish I.
Hopefully this is a little bit less of a big lift.
Oh, I'm probably going to be okay. Oh, I can get a clicker for this one. The power. I don't know. The power is going to go to my head, Michelle. There we go. Okay.
Click in that direction. Okay.
Okay, so welcome to the wonderful world of our insurance portfolio here at the university. Just generally, we have many, many different types of coverage. This is just to name a few of them. Everything from general liability to international travel, auto, property, the standards. But the reason I wanted to talk to you all about this is because you probably are most familiar with our general liability and our educators liability and our cyber. And I just wanted you to see the entirety of our portfolio because we have a lot of interesting things going on at the university that we are also insured for. So this slide is our insurance portfolio. And as you can see from some of the descriptions that we are covering a lot of instances of, based on professional liability. We just procured fiduciary for the new administration of our pension plans that is with the other two public colleges to administer the pension plans. We've got professional liability for architects and engineers. We've obviously got property based on all of our buildings, auto for all of our fleet vehicles, physical damage on a select group of our fleet vehicles that are high value or newer. Inland marine is all of our contents and equipment coverage. That covers things like our fine arts collection that is valued at over $9 million. So, and then it also covers everything down to gym equipment, weights and things like that. So that's an extensive schedule of insurance. Marine is a huge insurance portfolio for us because we have the Endeavor and we have a number of other smaller boats, and we have a specialized marine broker for that because it is such a specialized field of insurance. So that's very interesting. And while concussion insurance is covered under our general liability, we also have a special athletics injury policy specific for the day-to-day injuries that occur to our athletes. Cyber liability, as you're aware of, crime is standard for instances of employee dishonesty around financial issues. We have med-mal for our physicians and clinic. We have our blanket accident for our ambulance and our child development centers. Obviously, we have a separate policy to cover our URI faculty and students who travel abroad. We have one doctor, one psychologist who has a separate policy because of the nature of the work she does. And then, as you are probably all aware, we have the activities taking place in the Philippines and Fiji, and so we have specialized insurance for that. You approved a Fiji project last year, and so this is the result of that. And finally, we just secured commercial products liability for the Pharmaceutical Development Institute, which is located in Avedisian, and they are going to be working on analysis and development and manufacture of drugs. So the rest of this is going to be a brief talk about how tight the insurance market is and has been for several years now. Market conditions tight across all sectors. We are not seeing any relief in any of our insurance coverages. Premiums and deductibles or retentions are increasing, in some areas obviously increasing at much higher levels than others. And as a general rule, underwriters are just becoming extremely cautious and risk averse. And so they are imposing more controls. As we are seeing, particularly with cyber, they had a list of 13 things that they needed us to put into place in order to renew us this year. And many thanks to Carlos and Mike for achieving that so that we are confident in our renewal for cyber. So for just generally under liability, there's a lot of turmoil in the market. Claims are increasing. There's they're asking more questions when we renew. It's no longer just turn it in, sign it, and you're automatically renewed. There's now a lot more activity surrounding renewals, answering questions and everything. And they're very concerned, our insurers are very concerned about escalating defense costs and losses. So that what we're seeing now is that we're not only dealing with our underwriters, but terms and conditions are now being bumped up in the chain of command at insurance companies. And we're seeing a lot of decisions being made at the executive level that are then trickling down to affect our coverage. there's, when I say diminishing capacity for sexual abuse and molestation and TBI, what I mean is that there are fewer and fewer carriers that will insure institutions of higher education on these issues, which are required. We, as a NCAA Division I school, we are required to carry TBI or concussion insurance. And because we have, students who are young and we also host minors, we are required to have sexual abuse and molestation insurance. And so there are fewer carriers that are interested in that. And so many carriers are still exiting the market, leaving fewer and fewer options for us if we are hit with major increases from our current insurer. Obviously, these exclusions that they had during the pandemic are not going to go away. And professional liability exclusions are becoming much more common, which is a problem for us because we need a lot of professional liability insurance for a lot of our activities. And the class action lawsuits over tuition reimbursement still linger, which is injecting a lot of uncertainty in the liability arena for higher ed. So obviously, our primary excess and educators' legal liability have been hit the hardest out of all of our types of coverage. Property is through the state of Rhode Island. We are part of the state's property program. So the state procures the insurance at that level. And so what we're seeing there is because of the significant activity, natural disasters, windstorms, and all of those catastrophes, it's becoming a very volatile market with high premiums and high deductibles. The industry reported net underwriting loss of over $6 billion for the first half of 2022, and that's massive in the insurance industry. And what that refers to is they paid out more in claims and losses than they were taking in than they had underwritten for premiums. So they're making that up, obviously, in their other areas of investment. Cyber, again, is still very much in the news. It's very volatile. The ransomware attacks still continue. They're increasing in sophistication, so that's always a risk. And we have now specific controls imposed on us by our carrier as minimum standards for renewal. And so education and the public sector in general is considered a challenging industry by insurers due to the fact that public entities generally are a little bit behind the curve on the sophistication of IT. We generally have older systems that are more vulnerable.
On this one, though, we have made significant progress in the last year. We've invested quite a bit of money in it. And also we have really worked across the institution to identify systems that might be vulnerable and correct the conditions of vulnerability. Ditto cybersecurity training for everyone. We have a very high completion rate on the cybersecurity. So on that one, I think that we have taken the necessary steps to ensure that we will be A, insurable, and B, that we'll be, as cyber secure as the current technology allows. We can't promise more than that, but we're really working on that.
It's been remarkable how much we've achieved in the last year since we met with our underwriters.
Yeah.
And last year they were the only insurance company that would even quote us, so we had to meet their conditions. But it was again through the state, so we are just going along with their program, and then we just pay what they bill us. So really what's continuing to drive education liability in particular are a lot of sexual assault and misconduct issues. You've probably seen in all the news tons of Title IX, massive, hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements on Title IX issues. Reviver statutes, that's where states will change the law and increase the statute of limitations for certain claims. And so that insurance companies can't be assured that the statute of limitations that they thought was in place was going to cut off any claims. And we call this the long tail, where suddenly you can make a claim for certain offenses you know, well into the future, which then, you know, maintains that potential loss and risk open for very long periods of time. Social inflation is a huge problem. That's where we're seeing increased litigation, and so the higher payouts, the higher claim amounts are then having an impact on the premiums and our coverages and our deductibles. And nuclear verdicts. These are the runaway juries. That's been a problem for over a decade, but jury awards continue to increase drastically, which impacts the insurance because they end up having to pay that. I'll just leave it to you for these last couple of slides to look at. This is the higher education pricing trends. This is excess increases. As you can see, in 2021, it went up 50%. Increase in premium. I mean, that's a massive increase. We're back down to more reasonable levels, but historically we had about a 4% increase a year. And then our ELL, our employment practices percentage, this is another increase. It's been a little bit more steady, but as you can see, since 2019, it's been going up. And so this is what we're dealing with in our insurance market.
Right, and of course, you know, there's just pressure on the budget in every direction, really. This is a problem because, as you can see, the price increases are well in excess of inflation. And so it is basically taking resources that might be applied elsewhere. So I think that we're responding very well to the various, you know, the array of risks. And actually, I think Kara's group has made tremendous progress in sort of being the go-to resource. People really turn to their office now to make sure that they've got the insurance they need, that's the right kind, that they've done what they need to do. But the fact is, we're just dealing with big price increases. And so that's something we'll have to take into account going forward.
Any questions?
Kara, you didn't mention it, but did our DNO, our directors and officers insurance, did that change much? Is that getting more expensive?
That's covered under our ELL, our educators' legal liability, and so that's actually been, I mean, it's gone up significantly, but not as much as our general liability and our excess liability, but we're still seeing increases there, and that's just the way the market's going.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's keep it moving then with the compliance calendar. Still you, Karen.
I know, but this one's real quick. Every year I bring you the compliance calendar, and just really all that we really need to say about this is that we are, waiting to get I need the slides. There's really only 3 slides. The rest of it is our compliance calendar, and that's just to show you again, you know, what we have in terms of our reporting obligations and the timing and everything. But we thought, you know, if we sliced and diced all of those obligations for you in different ways, it might give you an interesting picture. So this is our reporting by department, and as you can see, most of the reports are coming out of our facilities and maintenance activities and research. And then it goes on down to, you know, down the line as to where most of the legal obligations for reporting are coming out of.
Right, and I think that's an important point to make, that what the compliance office is monitoring is where we have legal obligations to report.
Right. And so as the footnote says, this is all reporting types: reports, disclosures, notices, certifications. So it's very broad, but we track all of that. Lindsay here tracks all of that. And so then here we have it by topic. Obviously, you know, data related to our educational activities has the most reporting, all the way to and protection of environment. So those are to be expected because of the highly regulated environment those are in. And as you can see, it goes down the line by topic. And then this is by agency. So most of our reports go to the Department of Education and followed by EPA on the federal level, and then DEM on the state level. And then we have a couple of, at the very bottom, we have some reports that need to be made to local entities. So I thought that would just be sort of an interesting pictorial view for you guys to because the calendar is very dry.
Well, no, and the other thing I think that is really important is I think this represents a lot of progress for the university. This list didn't exist 3 years ago. And I think it's obviously a very important one. There's, we need to be, for many grants, we need to be in compliance with all our federal reporting obligations to all federal agencies. And the fact that we now have a comprehensive list of what those obligations are and can track them, I think is a very important step forward for the university. So I think this is really great work on Kara and Lindsay's part.
Mostly Lindsay. And that's it for me. I will now turn it over to Ted.
Actually,
Yeah, that's
back to
great.
Matt.
This is a good calendar. There's a lot there, so thank you for that. Yeah, Ted, we have you next for discussion item D, review compliance with standards governing the conduct of research misconduct.
Oh, you need the
I need that.
Oh, you need the microphone. Yeah.
I'll take the bag.
For having me here today. I'm Ted Light. I'm filling in for VP Snyder. The thought was
Ted, do you mind just going a little bit up more to
You
the
can.
microphone, just a little bit if you can?
Nope. Stand by. Should be.
That was perfect right there.
Okay, you can hear me? Okay. So I'm, like I said, I'm filling in for VP Snyder, but I'm the Associate Vice President of Research Administration. So a lot of the research compliance activities roll up to our Office of Research Integrity that I'm responsible for. And so today, thought we would review one of the policies that has some required reporting, and that's our research misconduct policy that is required by 45 or 42 CFR Part 93. So the reason I think this policy was chosen to review really quickly was that it had some recent updates in the last 6 months or so. We've had a policy on research misconduct since at least 1995, one in essentially this format, which was required by this regulation since 2005. So it's essentially been very similar since 2005, but figured we'd review it quickly, and I'll talk quickly at the end about some of the changes. So the policy discusses allegations of research misconduct, which the regulations very narrowly define as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. We do get allegations that don't fit that definition, and those are handled outside of this policy. But fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism is how that definition reads. And essentially, the policy describes the process for review of those allegations. So there's roles for myself. I'm designated as the research integrity officer. I'm responsible for doing the day-to-day review of those allegations. There's a role for VP Snyder, who is designated as the deciding official in this policy. The decisions are not ours alone every step of the way, and there's really 2 steps. There's an inquiry step and an investigation step. So if an allegation comes to our office, we do an initial inquiry that involves forming an inquiry committee of faculty or other folks that would have insight into that particular allegation. So these are all ad hoc committees that are that we encourage our faculty to help us out with. If the allegation has some substance, then we can move it on to a more formal investigation. So that's essentially how the process goes. I think the policy does a pretty good job describing exactly the steps. These steps are outlined in the federal regulation, so it's pretty prescriptive, this particular regulation. What else did I want to hit on? We do have annual reporting requirements, so this is one of the items that Kara's chart would show. So we have a report that has to describe any allegations that have made it to the investigation stage. So those are reported to the HHS Office of Research Integrity. There might also be reporting requirements based on specific sponsors. So if this was an allegation made related to a National Science Foundation grant or research involved in that grant, then there might also be reporting requirements to the National Science Foundation. The changes that were made over the past 6 months or so were clarifying the personnel that are required to meet this regulation. So in the past, we said, essentially broadly faculty, staff, and students, and we tried to clarify that this also included, say, part-time faculty, et cetera. We added statements about conflicts of interest. So if the allegations relate to something that I'm doing or something that VP Snyder is doing, there's clauses on how to delegate the responsibilities of the research integrity officer, the deciding official, to somebody that doesn't have a conflict. We added information about Lindsay and Kara's ethics hotline in there as a mechanism to report allegations. Reporting of allegations kind of come from any which way. They can come anonymously through the ethics hotline. They can, walk in my door and somebody just sit down in front of my desk. They can make reports directly to the federal sponsor of a particular grant. That has happened in the past where we have been notified of an allegation that has been made, say, through to the USDA of a research project that we have here. And so we get these allegations in a variety of ways. And then additional updates, we added a statement that respondents have the right for union representation if there is interviews or the like. And then we added a clause about whistleblower protections. So those are really, they're around the edges of the regulation. They're not substantive changes to the actual process of the allegation, investigation, or inquiry and investigation. I think the last thing I would say is one of the issues that we face is how to educate and provide some outreach on this policy to the broader research community. So we have another requirement to train graduate students, and primarily graduate students, in responsible conduct of research, of which research misconduct is one element or one topic area for responsible conduct of research. So we do train graduate students primarily in that area. So we train, over 500 mostly graduate students a year on the broader responsible conduct of research that misconduct is included on. We don't have any requirement now, and most institutions don't, on a broad requirement for faculty or those faculty that are involved in research. That may be coming down the pike. The National Science Foundation has issued a new policy that would require a broader RCR training, responsible conduct of research training, for all faculty involved in National Science Foundation grants, of which I think NSF is our biggest funder for research. And so that's one change that will be looking to implement in the next year. That
Is that proposed, or they
that goes into effect in July. So for grants awarded after July, I believe, or it's either, it should be grants awarded after July. So we have some time, but that's a big change. We don't really have, it hasn't been a topic area that we've been able to train faculty on. So that's something that is coming down the pike. So I think that's my update on that policy. Are there questions?
Hearing none, thank you for that. That's great, and I hope it's something that you don't have to really use all too often. I'm assuming that we have a really good research environment here.
That is true. It comes up a handful of times a year, which is a good place to be compared to other institutions, for sure.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much for that. All right, let's get to the next item on the agenda. The Governance Committee has asked the IRCC Committee to review the following policy in advance of their review and action on February 7th. So it's the review of the URI Board of Trustees policy on the approval and execution of contracts and other binding documents. I'll hand this over to Kara and Dan to go through.
I'll take it.
Please,
Since
I'm worse.
Worse. And also I did most of the work on this policy along with Lauren Jensen. So as I think most of you know, I'm assistant to the Vice President for Administration and Finance. And in that role, I manage the policy development here at the university. I work very closely with Ted on the research misconduct policy in order to update that, and also to a lot of the changes to that policy were about coordinating that policy with a number of other policies at the university. So this draft policy, as Matt said, is brought to the IRCC as a precursor to its presentation to the Governance Committee next week, and then later the Board of Trustees. The policy has had a thorough vetting throughout the university. It's been reviewed by the President's Executive Council and Administrative Policy Committee numerous times since it had other vetting through the administration prior to moving up to that level. There's really two things that provide for the need for this policy that this policy addresses. One is that the current signature authority policy requires updating every time a person changes a position. Signature authority is by name at the university right now, not by title. And the second thing is that the university has no real centralized guidance on the review and approval of relationships and transactions that are noted in its contract. So those are the two main components of this policy and the issues that we try to address it. So I'll walk through them real quickly and then open up to any questions. One, as I said, this policy creates signature authority by title, not by name, and it also allows for the delegation of that authority. I also want to make a side note that this is about binding the university. This policy is about binding the university to third parties. It's not about internal transactions. That's addressed in a separate document that's not connected to this one. And then the other thing this policy does, the other function it has, is it provides for how contracts between the university and third parties are reviewed, not just executed. The execution happens through the signature, the signatory person with signatory authority, but the review and approval is how contracts are reviewed in terms of their transactions. So the signature authorization per the policy will look like this. The chair of the Board of Trustees and the president have broad signature authority, with the board chair authorized to execute all contracts approved by the board. And the president is authorized to execute essentially any contract that, and this is the language in the policy, promotes the objectives of the university and or the Board of Trustees and is consistent with the established policies, rules, and regulations of the university. Also, all vice presidents have authority for the execution of contracts within their respective divisions. The director of athletics has authority for the execution of contracts within athletics. And general counsel has authority to execute contracts broadly relating to the provision of legal services or attorney-client relationship. These are the only positions that can bind the university to an outside authority. So that's one of the important pieces of this particular policy, but that authorization can be delegated through a process that's laid out in the policy. The second piece of this policy is about contract review and approval. So this policy provides rules for review and approval of contracts. Again, not the execution, but the review and approval. As laid out in this policy, contracts or obligations meeting certain thresholds have to be reviewed by specified personnel prior to their execution. This is all laid out in section 3 of the policy. I'll give you a few examples of this. For example, the president must review and approve all contracts with a financial obligation or exposure of $500,000 or more. The vice president for administration and finance must approve obligations of $250,000 or more, and the Board of Trustees reviews and approves obligations of $5 million or more. Again, I just want to clarify, this is review and approval, not execution. So for example, the president may review and approve a $1 million transaction related to a capital project, but ultimately that contract might go back to the vice president for administration and finance for the final execution of the document itself. Another example would be the Vice President for Research and Economic Development reviews and approves all contracts relating to sponsored awards and projects. These are just examples. Other examples are laid out, or thresholds are laid out in section 3. The other thing that this policy does, it does have sections on contract administration. The contract administration must be done by the contract owner, record retention, conflicts of interest, and there's also a statement on unauthorized commitments or agreements. In other words, those who enter into a contract without using an authorized signatory. So those are the basics of that policy. Though you have the contract in front of you, or I'm sorry, the draft policy, thank you, in front of you. I'm happy to take any questions on this if there are any.
Dan, I'm just assuming that this is all based on best practices with other universities of similar situations.
Yes, Lauren and I reviewed a number of other institutions. We did a pretty wide sweep to come up with this. And then it also internally, it had a lot of vetting. So there was a lot of shifting of a lot of these terms, especially the items related to Section 3 in terms of thresholds for the review.
Great, well, nice work. Any other questions?
Thank
Hearing,
you.
thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who participated in the discussion items today. Next item on the agenda is number 3, adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Robbie Luna, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Mike McNally. I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, looks like the yeses have it. The next URI Board of Trustees Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee meeting is tentatively scheduled for April 2023. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.
Great job, Matt.
Thank